The 10 richest people in history. Who had more money, John D. Rockefeller or Genghis Khan? It's a simple question with a very difficult answer. This ranking of the richest people of all time is based on hours of interviews with academic economists and historians. There have been countless fortunes won and lost throughout history, both modern and ancient. People have built massive amounts of wealth a variety of ways, through blood, through the crown, savvy investing, or building incredibly powerful businesses. Today it seems as though many of the world's wealthiest have built their mountains of money through business ventures or inheritance. But throughout history, things are a bit more violent. Let's have a look at the richest people in history. Number 10. William the Conqueror. The richest man in Britain's history is not a steel magnate, trader, or football club owner, but a soldier. The first Norman ruler of England who famously invaded the kingdom in 1066, William the Conqueror, seized lands and plundered treasures from Sussex to Yorkshire that would be worth $220 billion, 162 billion pounds in today's money. He spent his lavish riches on everything from tapestries to castles, including the iconic White Tower at the Tower of London. King William was a hard man, determined to use force to impose his will on the nation he had conquered. He was so successful at it, the Anglo-Saxons became second-class citizens in their own country. You may not like William, who did, but you have to admit that this hard, inflexible, and unlovable man was politically the master of his world. And the fascinating thing about the Norman invasion is that it is still known as the Conquest. Number 9. Osman Ali Khan. The former Nizam of Hyderabad, Osman Ali Khan, is counted among the wealthiest people of the world. According to a news report from the British newspaper The Independent, the Nizam of Hyderabad, 1886 to 1967, had a net worth of $236 billion. In February 1937, he made an appearance on the cover of Time magazine, labeled as the richest man in the world, a fortune estimated at $2 billion US in the early 1940s, $34.9 billion today, or 2% of the US economy at that time. Celebrity Net Worth also ranked him as one of the top 25 wealthiest persons of all time in its inflation-adjusted list. The website, which reports estimates of the total assets and financial activities of celebrities, ranked the last Nizam as 6th in a list of the 25 richest people who ever lived. It had estimated his wealth at $230 billion and quoted in the description, "Mir Osman Ali Khan had a personal collection of gold that was worth more than 100 million and owned over 400 million worth of jewels, including the famous Jacob diamond, which is worth 95 million today." Khan used the diamond as a paperweight in his office. He supposedly owned more than 50 Rolls-Royce. Osman Ali Khan is believed to have remained as the richest man in South Asia until his death in 1967. However, his wealth went down to $1 billion US by then, as over 97% of his wealth, including jewelry belonging to his family, was taken away by the newly formed Indian government. The Indian government still displays Nizam's jewelry at exhibition. Number 8. Nikolay Romanov. Nikolay Alexandrovich Vitorov, 15th of April 1866 to the 20th of May 1918, was a Russian industrialist. According to the 2006 Forbes study, which excluded the ruling house of Romanov, he held the title for Russia's wealthiest man on the eve of World War I, owning an estimated 60 million rubles in gold. Nikolay owed his fortune to his father, Alexander Vitorov, a successful Irkutsk businessman who set up a trans-Siberian retail shopping network. Upon his death in 1911, Alexander Vitorov's net worth was estimated at 13.6 million rubles. It passed to Nikolay and his lesser-known brother, who had lived in Moscow since 1897. Nikolay Vitorov used his father's fortune to take over numerous banks and manufacturing companies. His aggressive takeover policies earned him the nickname of the Russian Morgan. During his reign, he saw Imperial Russia transform from being one of the foremost great powers of the world to economic and military collapse. As for his foreign policy, Romanov's main objective was to maintain the status quo in Europe. One of the successfully completed projects in his time is the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railroad, which still remains the largest railway in the world. With most of his wealth coming from the nation's coffers and the successes of his ancestors, he is one of the only examples among the world's wealthiest people who didn't get there by their own entrepreneurial abilities. Number 7. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, November 25, 1835 to August 11, 1919, was a philanthropist. Carnegie led the expansion of the American steel industry in the late 19th century and became one of the richest Americans in history. He became a leading philanthropist in the United States and in the British Empire. During the last 18 years of his life, he gave away $350 million, conservatively $65 billion in 2019 dollars, based on percentage of GDP, to charities, foundations, and universities, almost 90% of his fortune. Andrew Carnegie helped build the formidable American steel industry, a process that turned a poor young man into the richest man in the world. A legendary figure in his own time, Carnegie embodied the American dream, the immigrant who made it from rags to riches. Carnegie was fond of saying, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." He made his fortune and then, unlike any industrialist of his time, began systematically giving it away. Carnegie wrote of the obligations of the wealthy, how they should return their money to the societies where they made it. Jacob Fugger. Jacob Fugger was a German banker who financed kings, explorers, bishops, and popes, and along the way he made the biggest fortune ever amassed by a business person. The grandson of a peasant, he persuaded Leo X to legalize for-profit lending. One of his money-making schemes provoked Martin Luther to write the 95 Thesis and kick off the Reformation. He played kingmaker in the 1519 election for Holy Roman Emperor. Jacob in German, Fugger and his money gave the vote to Charles V of Spain and put Charles atop an empire as big as Napoleon's. Fugger was worth about $400 billion in current dollars at the time of his death in 1525, or 2% of Europe's GDP at the time. John D. Rockefeller was close in dollar terms, but his wealth equaled a small part of the U.S. economy and Bohemia. Number 5. John D. Rockefeller. The richest American ever is widely considered to be John D. Rockefeller, worth about $400 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars, or about 2% of the United States GDP. Members of his family continue to be some of the wealthiest people in U.S. history. John Davidson Rockefeller Sr., July 8, 1839, May 23, 1937, was an American business magnate and philanthropist. He is widely considered the wealthiest man of all time and the richest person in modern history. Rockefeller was born into a large family in upstate New York that moved several times before eventually settling in Cleveland, Ohio. Rockefeller became an assistant bookkeeper at age 16 and went into several business partnerships beginning at age 20, concentrating his business on oil refining. Number 4. Akbar I. Akbar I was the emperor of India's Mughal dynasty and lived in luxury rivaled only by the Bourbons of France and the Romanovs of Russia. So impressed were the British by the wealth of the Mughals that the word Mughal entered the English language as a term to describe an all-powerful ruler of industry, films, or other endeavor. The greatest emperor of India's Mughal dynasty at one time had a quarter of the global economic output, mostly attributed to his collection of taxes. It is believed that India's wealth at that time was equivalent to that of Elizabethan England. That assertion that India's elite class was wealthier than their counterparts to the West is backed up by data from economist Branko Milanovic, whose research shows the Mughal dynasty was one of the most effective empires of all time at extracting wealth from the population. Number 3. Augustus Caesar, the first Roman emperor who ruled the vast empire from 27 BC until his death in AD 14, boasted a personal fortune equivalent to 20% of the entire empire's economy, worth $4.63 trillion, 3.28 trillion pounds nowadays. Poor economic performance and a succession of military failures plagued his final years. Not only was Augustus Caesar in charge of an empire that accounted for 25 to 30% of the world's economic output, but according to Stanford history professor Ian Morris, Augustus at one point held personal wealth equivalent to 1/5 of his empire's economy. That fortune would be the equivalent of about $4.6 trillion in 2014. For a while, Morris adds, Augustus personally owned all of Egypt. That's hard to top. Shenzhong of Song. Emperor Shenzhong ruled China's Song dynasty with 25 to 30% of global GDP, according to Professor Ronald A. Edwards, a Chinese economic historian of the Song dynasty at Tamkang University. Shenzhong ruled China from 1076 to 1085, during the peaceful prosperity and primary abundance eras, when he controlled around 30% of global GDP, the equivalent of 30 trillion today. Its famous new policies, which helped improve the lives of the poor, are seen as a forerunner of the modern welfare state. Emperor Shenzhong of China is a contender for the richest man to ever live. It's possible he had the highest net worth ever. It's difficult, however, to separate his personal wealth from his country's, ranking him lower on the list. Number 1. Manza Musa. Manza Musa I of Mali. Manza Musa was born in 1280 into a family of rulers. Under his rule, the Kingdom of Mali grew significantly. He annexed 24 cities, including Timbuktu, with a kingdom that stretched for about 2,000 miles from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to modern-day Niger. With such a large mass came great resources, such as gold and salt. During the reign of Manza Musa, the Empire of Mali accounted for almost half of the Old World's gold, according to the British Museum, and all of it belonged to the king. As the ruler, Manza Musa had almost unlimited access to the most highly valued source of wealth in the medieval world. Kathleen Bickford-Burzak, who specializes in African art at the Bloch Museum of Art at the Northwestern University, told the BBC, "We can see that Musa created a positive image for himself. They are all human beings just like us, and if they can achieve, so can we." How do you plan to start your journey towards success? Let us know in the comments what you think about these persons. Have you ever heard about any of these people? Don't forget to subscribe to Luxury 101 to view more interesting stuff. Thanks for watching.